Okay, so I'm going to attempt here to, I would say, rebut Sam Harris's arguments. I am a big fan of Jordan B. Peterson, so I am coming from sort of like his side, I guess you could say. But I couldn't quite constrain myself to the Darwinian explanation that he's using here, and I wouldn't claim to be as well-read or knowledgeable about archetypes as him in any sense. I have a unique, background to me, and I can only offer my perspective. So what started out as what I thought, well, all of these little micro examples that Sam Harris is putting forth here, that some of the YouTube commenters in his on his channel are saying that they were impossible to refute. And I started thinking about that and wondering if that's in fact the case. Are they impossible to refute? And if I could, in fact, refute them. So it started out as sort of an intellectual game there, just to see if I was thinking properly on these issues, because I do tend to be more on the Jordan B. Peterson side. But as I started thinking more about it and writing about it a bit, it did expand a bit. So it's gonna, I will attempt to describe the way I'm seeing the Darwinian argument, and then I'm going to take it more into a more of a consciousness kind of aspect. I don't come from any religious background specifically, but I've done quite a bit of study of, the nature of consciousness and things. Read some of Jung. I'm not versed in the same way as Jordan Peterson, although I'm attempting. I'm almost through the first volume of Gulag Archipelago, which has been a horrifying journey, and maybe I'll talk about that later. But let's get started with some of these points, and I'll try and go through them and give a refutal and try and see if I can make sense. So at some point they agree that there are facts, they can both agree to look at the smallpox virus and say that yes, it's there, but Jordan B. Peterson determines that it's not truth, but merely a fact, which I think the problem is that it is, yes, we can say things are real and true from a certain context and from a certain level of analysis. And I came up with this example. I'm sure I've heard it before, but came to mind. The idea of the country. Say we're in the United States, and we all agree that it's a fact that this is the United States. So I can go ask my neighbor, and they're going to say it's the United States, and my computer might tell me I'm in the United States. So it's a fact in that sense that we all agree it is. But, if you ask my dog what country he's in, he has no idea, and he doesn't care, and it makes no difference to him whatsoever. His experience of Canada versus the United States, for example, if you go from Vancouver to Seattle or something like that, it still rains in both places. It's not going to make any difference. Same with, if you ask a tree, what country are you in? It's not clear that a country is a real thing, but we all agree it's a thing, so it is a thing, right? And so we can look at levels of like higher truth. So I thought of this example of a clock versus the sun, and you can say the clock is more true than, say, a sundial, right? A clock has more accuracy. It can keep track of time even at night. But you might actually say that the sundial is more true than the clock because, a clock can be set incorrectly. A sundial, well, you could set it incorrectly, but it's always going to cast a shadow in the same way. And you could even say a higher truth may be the sun. Okay, the sun itself is a higher truth than the clock, even though it's less precise in the way that we perceive it. Now we get down to it, and I don't think Jordan B. Peterson would say, I'm just going to call him Dr. Peterson. In my notes, I call him JBP, but it's my own little affectionate name. But if we look at, okay, so you can say, yeah, but the clock is real. And this has been one of the arguments that I've been getting on the YouTube channels when I'm commenting, is people say, well, if I punched you or if I shot you 37 times, someone said, if I shot you 37 times, you're not going to stand there wondering if your physicality is more important than your consciousness, because you're going to be dead. And theoretically, I shouldn't be culpable for murder because you're not really real, and the body doesn't mean anything. And we're not saying that at all, or I'm not saying that. And I don't think Jordan is saying that either, and Dr. Peterson. It's that consciousness itself is, like, there's one level of truth which says I'm a body and I'm a solid matter. That's absolutely true. You can look closer and say that there are molecules, and that's absolutely true from that level of analysis. But when you zoom out, you can say, well, human consciousness is more true than my body, because you can kill my body and human consciousness still exists. You can say other people if you want to go with a kind of strict material reductionist viewpoint, or the species exists or whatever. I personally, subscribe to some kind of spirituality where I think consciousness as encompassing the bodies, the potential for life is sort of above consciousness, and that's the ultimate truth, is like the potential for consciousness, which is a really hard thing to go about your day. And that was one of the other comments I got on the YouTube rebuttals was, well, you would be paralyzed if you went about your day like that. Well, the truth is that it does paralyze you for a period of time when you start to think about these things. Like, you read something, and Dr. Peterson talks about this quite a bit, where it basically destroys your whole life. Like, it destroys your conception of yourself and everyone you knew and everything you've ever thought you've known. And that's pretty serious. It has caused me to, quit jobs and rethink my life and move to different places and change my activities and change my friends and all kinds of things. When you start to conceive these things, and then you do go through a period where you're like, oh my God, why bother doing anything? But there is something inside of you that is drawn to something, right? And there's that kind of spark of life, that curiosity, that interest. So, and that is, I would say, if you're not in a really, really horrible, dark place, if you allow, or if you are allowed by your situation to allow yourself to explore what it is that really interests you, and then you kind of pursue that, and you think, okay, I'm interested in that. I'm going to pursue that, whether that's art or science or writing or philosophy or whatever. Like, for me, there have been many points in my life where this has happened, where I have some concept come over me and it totally destroys my entire life, and I have to make different choices and change the way I'm thinking about things. So that's actually good, I think. Even though it doesn't fit with, your parents. My parents don't approve because they're like, well, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with the logical perspective. But it allows you to explore different things. And I think this is getting into a philosophical discussion, but I guess it's where we're heading with this. So I think one of the major lessons when I'm looking back at my life, which I've been doing recently since I've been listening to Dr. Peterson quite a bit, is I realized what were points in my life where I made really good choices, and not good choices from necessarily a financial standpoint, although I've always, made do. I've always been, resourceful enough to keep myself afloat. But good choices for myself. So, I've suffered from depression at different times. And it's like, if this situation is causing me extreme angst, even if it's, going to an Ivy League school and it's the best sort of thing for me, quote unquote, as my parents or society might say, then I've gone, okay, that's not good for me at this time in this situation. So I guess you could say that it's not true, or wasn't true at that time, that going to an Ivy League school was necessarily better for me, because I was at risk of, like, say suicide, or just like really bad health, making poor decisions, and even like being pressured to take a job where I'd be paid a lot more, but I wouldn't be happy. And that's kind of a cliche, but it was kind of my situation at times. And then I just sort of said, like, I need a break from this. This isn't working for me. And despite a lot of complaining from some people close to me who were maybe worried for my safety, although I think they had different motives, but we won't get into that now. Then I went and took time off, and I did something that was interesting to me, and I pursued that. And then I got afraid that that wasn't good enough. I wanted the security of what everyone else thought was right. And so then I would just like go back on the decision. And so these were points in my life. So there were points in my life where I realized, okay, this isn't working for me. Let me try something different. And then I got scared and I went back. And this happened a few times. And going back has always been probably the worst decisions of my life. Like even having an Ivy League education has been pretty much one of the worst decisions of my life. Like it wasn't good. It was a big waste of money and didn't do anything for me at all. And so, yeah, I think that so we're getting into sort of personal stories here, and let me try and get back. It's kind of like I'm having a conversation, and so I'm going to try and make it as coherent as possible, but it's also much more interesting, I think, to do this as a conversation rather than just plow through points as if I weren't a living being with consciousness. So things are true at a certain level of context, right? I really liked his Dr. Peterson's rebuttal about the affair, where you can show pictures of someone's wife sleeping with someone else, and you can absolutely say that happened, and that's absolutely true from the level of analysis of like them physically being in the bed together. But maybe a higher level of truth was not an affair because maybe the man was neglectful for 10 years or whatever it was, and they weren't even speaking together or sleeping in the same room or whatever the situation was. We do this in our system of legal work as well, like in police work. So say they find, you with the knife in your hand and blood all over you. That's certainly evidence, but it's not what we would call the truth. We still need to investigate to determine the truth. It's possible that you found the knife and the real murderer went somewhere else, ran away or whatever, and you were examining it when the police arrived or something like that. So we don't really say that the physical knife in your hand is the truth. We still need to get to the truth. All we have is evidence and perceived evidence. And so I think that that's a pretty good analogy to say, like, yes, it's real, and yes, we can look at it and we can manipulate it and we can decide, but it's not truth necessarily just because we have physical evidence. And you can do that with all those examples. I was going to run through them, and it's very interesting. I thought that the order of the U.S. presidents, which Sam Harris was pretty enamored with for a little while, where he said, well, the order of U.S. presidents is true. And, we all agree it's true, and whether or not someone has a gun to your head and shoots you because you get the order of presidents wrong, it doesn't make it any less true. Well, that's true because we sort of agree it's true. I think that one's the least strong example, really, because it's really, really a matter of agreement. Like I said, the fact that we're in the U.S. at all is just because we agree. That's the case. It doesn't really have anything to do with matter or existing. It's just really a social construct. And then you get down to it with like, well, do the molecules in my hand exist? Yeah, they exist. But is that truth? Is that the highest truth? That the molecules in my hand exist? I don't actually think so. And I started thinking about the smallpox example, and this was the one that gave me the most difficulty trying to come up with. But then I think I got it, and obviously people will tell me that I'm crazy. I definitely expect that. So the smallpox example was like, we can all agree on the chemical structure of smallpox, and the smallpox exists, and whether or not that smallpox is proliferated in a way to make vaccines or weapons is sort of irrelevant to the structure, the chemical structure of smallpox. And that's true from the level of analysis, a certain level of analysis. But then say, we'll throw out hypothetical examples because that's what we're working with Sam Harris's examples. Okay, so in smallpox, let's say I found a way to destroy all of the smallpox in the world. Like, it didn't exist at all. So I completely wiped smallpox off the face of the planet. But we still had the chemical makeup of smallpox. So I would say that the concept of smallpox is more true than the physical smallpox, because you could totally wipe out smallpox, all the samples of smallpox that we have, and we still have the concept of smallpox, and you could replicate it theoretically. And I guess Sam Harris's point is that, well, that's true, then that knowledge is true because we can make it happen in the physical world. But the potential for smallpox to exist, the concept of smallpox is more true than the physical smallpox. That's where I got to on that one, and maybe someone can help me figure out a better way to put it. The numbers on the screen one, that was a very interesting one, where it's like, okay, well, if I showed you, the largest prime number that anyone has ever possibly seen, and they show it to you and say, this is the largest prime number that's ever been seen, and that's a true fact. And you could say, yeah, well, but even the concept of a number is a concept. Well, you could say no, because say I have one orange and one apple. Well, okay, so you have the physical orange, and I'm not saying that the physical orange is not real. Like the example of, if you punched me in the face, would I be wondering if it was real or not? Well, no, because pain is real, and probably more real than the physicality of my face, because it's an experience in consciousness. I don't know, I may or may not be making sense here. And maybe once this goes out, I'll have to tighten up my arguments, but I'm trying to articulate what I think is true, and maybe I can make more sense and refine my arguments over time, which is the whole point of me doing this in the first place, is just to kind of figure out what it is I believe and try and make it more articulated and more clear to myself. So to the example, because I did get this reply on YouTube, what if I shot you 37 times? Would you be worrying about whether or not it's real? Because human consciousness trumps the physical body. And I already said that the idea of, well, yeah, you can kill my physical body, but it doesn't erase the truth of me. Whether or not you believe in a soul or kind of afterlife or whatever, maybe it exists in the memories, and maybe that act of someone shooting me 37 times does reverberate out into the world. And I think there is I'm saying that there is a level of truth that's beyond the physicality. So I think the intention, the negativity of someone shooting me 37 times does make a difference to life. Okay, so let me give an analogy, and then I'll get into my concept of what I believe is truth. So this analogy I came up with, and I became a little bit enamored with it, was this idea of a radio. Okay, so if someone punches me in the face, and then I thought of, okay, so say you have a radio, like an old school boombox, and I come along and I smash it. Well, it's definitely sucky that I smashed it. And I wouldn't, get off by saying, well, the radio isn't anything but a receiver, so you shouldn't be upset. No, the radio is as real from what we're working with in our perceptions as anything else. The road or the trees or whatever. But a radio does more than just sit there physically, right? A radio receives radio waves. And you could say that the radio waves are more true than the radio itself. Because if I smashed your radio, then the radio waves still exist. And say I went on a, radio terrorism rampage and I destroyed all of the radio stations in the whole world. Well, I still haven't destroyed radio waves. Maybe there aren't any radio waves being emitted by humans. And I destroyed all, so then all you've got is radios. And say I destroyed all of the radios and all of the radio waves and all of the radio towers. So there's no more radios or radio production or radio wave production at all. I'm not saying that those aren't real. Obviously they're real, and I'm, as far as we're concerned, and I'm punching them and destroying them, and that's not good, I would say, from a moral standpoint. And me smashing them doesn't make them any less real or less existent, because you could say, well, those particles now still exist somewhere, or they've transformed into energy if I used some kind of bomb or whatever, set them on fire. Okay, but the potential for radio waves still exists now. And that's what I'm saying is consciousness, or beyond consciousness even. So beyond the radio waves even is the potential for consciousness. And that's what I think is beyond any physicality. And that's sort of analogous to my viewpoint on humans. And Jordan Peterson talks about the concept of ideas have people, not people have ideas. And I think that's pretty true. Like, you go around and you think these are my thoughts and they're unique to me. Well, that's not exactly true. Millions of other people have the exact same thoughts as you. And just because you're experiencing them, you think that they're more real or more personal, or you become attached to them or enamored with them or whatever. But I do think that humans and the human brain are kind of like a radio, in that we're attuned to a certain station. So if you're an addict, you are attuned to receive very certain thoughts, and those thoughts lead to behavior patterns. And if you find a way to end your addiction, so say you join a 12-step group, and don't discount the idea of 12-step groups. It's quite amazing if you've never studied them. This is an aside, but I'll say it anyway. In our generation, we don't really think of alcoholism as a big deal. Like, it is a big deal, but it's not really a big deal, because it's sort of curable. You can just stop. But this was not the case very long ago. I mean, if in the 50s or in the 30s or for generations before, you got diagnosed with alcoholism, there is nothing you can do. You die of a wet brain. And a wet brain means your brain, it just liquefies. I mean, there is zero cure. They can lock you up in a mental institution and you can become sober, but the addiction never leaves you. And if you ever get a chance to leave that institution, you will absolutely drink and you will absolutely die. And this is what happened when they formed Alcoholics Anonymous. Was, these wives were being told, your husband's an alcoholic, and it basically means that he's no longer ever going to support you again, and he's going to be in a mental institution, and he's going to die. It was a pretty serious thing, and Young worked with not Bill Wilson, who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, but the precursor to the precursor of Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson had a friend who came to him and basically told him, you have to adopt higher power. And Bill Wilson was like, hell no. He was an atheist and he hated religion and he refused. And his friend, and I forget his name, I think it started with an R. Someone will know. Anyway, he said, okay, well, forget about religion. Forget about, Jesus and Christianity and any other form of religion. Basically just admit that there's something out there higher than yourself. Okay. Some consciousness that's higher than something, anything. And in 12-step groups, it really, really doesn't matter. People have, I've seen atheists join AA and work with the concept of their higher power being nature or even science. And, they struggle with it, but eventually they do get sober, because it's basically just saying, hey, my own stupid little self is not God. I'm not God. And I can't possibly solve everything, and I can't possibly know anything, and so I'm going to ask for help. I can't remember why I got into this, but, the idea of alcoholism being a curable disease, like, we don't even think of it. We don't even think of it as a disease. Like, it's a disease, but it's so trivial nowadays because it's not considered completely deadly, because there are recovery programs. And before that, it was really, really impossible. And Young said to, I think it was named Roland. It was not Roland, but someone right before him. Maybe it was Roland. It wasn't the friend that came to Bill Wilson. It was a friend of that friend. It's all in the history of AA, and I just have forgot it now. Where he went over to Europe and he worked with Young doing psychoanalysis. And he was cured. And then he came back to the U.S. and he basically started drinking again. And so he went back to Young, and Young said, neither my art nor my science can help you. The only thing left for you to do is to find religion. And that was very depressing to this person, because he also was an atheist and he hated religion. And he ended up joining, I think it was called the Oxford Groups, which was basically just sort of a spiritual group, or it was just kind of a moral group, like adhere to these moral principles. It didn't really have anything to do with formal religion. And that's how it all got started. So this concept that there is something higher than the physical, and that the physical is not truth, so the physical is, it's not that it's unreal, it's definitely real in our current situation. It's definitely real. And there is an objective nature to it. Like, I have a planter here. It's this plastic planter I'm looking at right now. And it exists, right? It just is sitting there. It's this plastic thing. I could go over and bend it, and the plastic will behave in a certain way. I could light it on fire, and it would smell a certain way. I'm not denying that. But is that planter truth? Is the chemical concept, like, what level of analysis? Well, maybe that's not truth, but the chemical composition of it is truth. The fact that it exists is true. Right. But it exists as far as my perception sees it. And you could say, well, no, it exists more than that. It's an objective truth. I'd say that we have no idea really what objective truth is, and I would posit to say that the potential for that pot to exist, and the source from which it came, which, okay, so we're talking about religion here. We're getting into kind of a religious aspect. So people often will discount religion because they think, well, it didn't happen by some miracle. It happened in the physical world. But my understanding of truth is that it did happen in the physical world. So I made a sort of a joke where Sam Harris talks about the number of hairs on Dr. Peterson's body and whether there are an even or an odd number of hairs. Well, I sort of went to quantum physics, which I don't have a really in-depth understanding of, but I kind of get the concept of it, which does seem to trump Newtonian physics, which is, we don't know the exact number of hairs on Jordan B. Peterson's body, and once I may be confusing it with the uncertainty principle, or another concept in quantum physics, but the idea that a particle can be both a particle and a wave at the same time, for example, until we look at it and then it chooses, right? So once we start counting the hairs on Jordan B. Peterson's body, the theory is that they could change. Well, that I kind of put that out there. And of course you're going to say, well, that's not possible. There are a certain number of hairs on Jordan B. Peterson's body, and if you take a picture of it and somehow captured all the hairs, it would be impossible. But theoretically, there is an answer, according to Sam Harris. Well, I would say, well, maybe it is possible to say that maybe they do decide once you start counting. I don't know if that's true or not, because it seems to only happen at the really minute level. Like, it doesn't seem to happen on the level of analysis in which we currently experience the world. Like, it has to be, at a really, really tiny particle level. So theoretically, like, hairs wouldn't change suddenly. However, my concept of how consciousness, spirituality works is that consciousness and life and God, if we want to call it God, are all the same. So, and this concept of God doesn't work outside of it's not like a billiard ball where you hit one ball and, God created the earth and then he's just let the whole thing go and we're just billiard balls bouncing off each other. But in fact, that creation and evolution happen at the same time all the time, right? So instead of saying, okay, well, it's probably unlikely that the number of hairs on Jordan B. Peterson's body suddenly jump into attention as soon as we start counting. However, it's possible that a life force could sprout a hair. You know what I mean? I don't think God comes down with a big finger and points and this hair appears out of nowhere. God is part of nature and works in nature, and so if there was a certain karmic outcome that was more appropriate for the situation, which would make all outcomes turn out in a more, whatever way life is supposed to work out, that maybe a hair would fall out or a hair would sprout right as we started counting, or maybe even 15 hours before we started counting. So it's not like miracles happen outside of the physical world, they happen inside the physical world. God works through nature and through consciousness. So suddenly you have an idea that you never had before. Well, maybe your radio station has changed and you're now receiving a different kind of thoughts. Like that happens when you join a 12-step group. You suddenly have a different set of thoughts that are, attuning yourself to a brainwave, or the chemicals in your brain change because. So if we go back to this idea of the body as a receiver, so the body like a radio, well, the brain is like the receiver, and when it has different chemicals, it's attuned to receive different thoughts. So we got into the nature of consciousness. That's pretty good. Let me just pause and see if I'm missing anything. I wanted to touch again on this concept of cultivating reality to propagation of the species. So what they're sort of placing on Dr. Peterson is this idea that we should act in a way that will ensure the continuation of the species, and that end, the continuation of the species, should be our goal, or they think that's what Jordan Peterson is arguing, and I don't think that's the case. I've heard him articulate in other places the idea that you shouldn't act in order to get something, because we don't know what's best, or what the desirable outcome. Once we get the desired outcome, and I've seen this happen in my life and a lot of other people's lives, where they think they want something, and then once they, then they manipulate the entire world, or their entire experience of the world, people in it, the best they can, to get that desired outcome, and then it doesn't make them happy, and it's sort of destroying, like it destroys your whole self. That's actually been a lot of the sources of growth for myself, which is when I got the thing that I thought I wanted, and it didn't give me any kind of satisfaction that I thought it would. Like, I thought once I was in this school, once I got into this school, for example, it would be like the heavens would open and I would be praised and everyone would love me and I'd be happy forever. And it was like, okay, no, but if I get straight A's in this school, that then the heavens will open and all the things I've been struggling for will be worth it, and blah, 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 blah. And then that didn't happen. And then, the next thing, well, if I get a perfect relationship, if I meet a mate, and then the heavens will open and everything will be perfect from then on. And that didn't happen either. So basically it was like, you have no idea what you want. And that is a true fact. Like, you think you want something, but it really may not be the best thing for you. And if you spend all your time manipulating your world to get there, it's really not going to be a good thing for everyone around you. So I don't think that Dr. Peterson is advocating for a manipulative approach to the world, where you manipulate the world in order to propagate the species. So what do we do if we're not manipulating the world to get what we want? This is a concept I've pulled from a few different areas, but we'll say, I think that truth is that which is beneficial to life. And I mean all of life, capital L life. So how should you act? Each act is a thing that would ideally be beneficial to life. So what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. Like, sometimes telling someone to fuck off is the thing that's best for life. So you can't say, well, that means being nice and holy and polite and all that, because if someone's behaving quite badly towards you or threatening you or something, sometimes telling someone to fuck off is the best thing. Or sometimes you tell someone, you're having an argument with someone and you tell them to fuck off, and then you break into laughter or whatever. Like, I don't know, because it matters a lot what the particulars are, which is what Dr. Peterson says. So if each action that you take is the best that you can do to get as close to pro-life, and I'm not speaking in terms of abortion or anything like that, nor does it mean that you should never kill anything necessarily, because sometimes maybe you need to kill a bug to further your life or something like that. So I'm studying permaculture right now. If I'm not making 100% sense, the point is to try and articulate the truth as best I understand it. And the reason it's not clear and simple is because it's a not clear and simple topic. It's an extremely difficult topic, and I would distrust anyone who makes it clear and simple. I mean, maybe I will definitely get more articulate because this is my very first attempt at this. The reason I'm telling stories in it is because this is how humans process information, is through stories. I've studied Roger Schenck, who's an ex-Harvard professor who studied, artificial intelligence and learning and education, and he has a lot of criticisms of our education system, which I'm very interested in. But he basically says that when we're having a conversation, we tell stories, and the way that I know that you understand me is because you tell a story that's similar, and then I can say, well, no, that's not quite right. Here, I'll tell another story, and then you tell a story, and you tell me if that story is closer to what you think I mean, and then we get to a point. But it's through sharing stories where it's like, oh, I understand what you mean because I've experienced that, or I get that concept because I've heard it before in these ways. And that's how you come to an understanding. So that's why I'm telling stories. Anyway, I can't remember what my point was now. Oh yeah, so this whole idea of like, well, we can't act because you'll be totally paralyzed if you think of it as things are not true unless the outcome is that the propagation of the species. Well, first of all, you don't know that the propagation of our species is most beneficial thing to all of life. All that you can do is act in a way that you conceive of as the most beneficial to life in this moment. And maybe that will bring you closer to truth. And I would say if you act in a way that's detrimental to life, it brings you further away from truth. So it makes you sick, and then you're not able to perceive truth as easily. Like when you lie, it makes you sick. And if you act in a way that's beneficial to life, I think that is what truth is. Truth is life. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to say is this happened right at the beginning of the conversation, and I would have stopped Sam Harris right at the beginning and said, wait, I don't agree with that. But I'm not Dr. Peterson, and I may never be in the situation of speaking to Sam Harris. But he said that, we've basically outgrown tribalism, and I don't think that we have. And I think it's sort of a detrimental concept. So, first of all, we may have outgrown tribalism along kind of racial lines, which I think is what he means. First of all, tribalism isn't necessarily bad because, maybe warring tribalism where we're constantly fighting each other with arrows or whatever and going and stealing each other's wives or whatever we were doing, those things aren't maybe so good, but there definitely is tribalism. I mean, the whole idea of social justice warriors, what is that? There's a tribe of people within the victim mentality culture, and basically they're saying that if you agree with me, you're in my tribe, and if you don't agree with me, you are not in my tribe, and if you don't agree with me and you are not in my tribe, I will attack you and destroy you, and if you do agree with me and are within my tribe, then I will protect you and accept you. So basically, this whole idea that humans have outgrown their tribal roots is, I think, fallacious and dangerous, because if we know that we have tribal instincts, then maybe we can try to mitigate them. But if we pretend we do not have tribal instincts, then what? And I think that's dangerous. So this whole idea that we have outgrown our tribal roots, I think is false. And I'll tell this story about my dog, and I'm sure I'll tell it again because it's been a big deal for me. My dog got sick. He had some complex liver disease, and vets weren't really able to help him. And that's fine. That's just the way it was. But he's a lot better now. But I started paying attention to him because he was sick. And we used to go out to walk in this very busy, dog walking area where there were a lot of other dogs and people. And we'd go out and we'd meet a ton of other dogs. I mean, maybe 20 dogs a day. And let's say that 10 of them were new dogs and 10 of them were dogs that we'd already met. And then there's people on top of that. And then there's things. He was a lot less interested in things like cars, but there was certainly a lot going on. But every time we saw a dog, my dog had to stop and assess whether that dog was a good dog. And my dog is really friendly, and he's a small dog, and he's not vicious at all. He's never growled, ever. And so he's very friendly when he meets a dog, but as he got sicker, he got more cautious, which is probably a good thing. So it was really, really annoying to walk him because I wanted to walk, to a place and then walk back, and I had a limited amount of time. But he had to stop, and he would just stop and wait, and he'd sit down and wait like a good little dog and wait for the other dog to come. And this would be from a long distance away, as far as I'm concerned, half a block or more. And he would just wait, and I'd have to wait for the other dog to come. And sometimes the other dog would stop and wait, and then we'd be really standstill. And I decided I didn't really want to pull him along. So then I thought, well, I can train him out of it. You can give him treats as he's coming close to the dog and all this stuff. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, actually, maybe I don't want to train him out of it. Like, this is a good instinct for him to, when he's sick especially, to be not mean, not paranoid, but just like aware that there's another animal that he does not know, and he needs to assess whether or not that animal is a threat or a friend, and act appropriately. Most of the time, I'd say like 90% of the time, he was good with it. But there was occasional dogs where they just, maybe they were an angry dog or a vicious dog or whatever it was, and he just didn't really want to see them, and he would try and avoid it. Like, he would try and kind of walk around them or pull back or whatever. That's fine. And I decided I didn't really want to train this out of him. Like, this is actually a good thing. I don't have very good instincts. Like, I don't know if I'm talking to a sociopath, which I've done a lot in my life and gotten really involved with sociopaths. And trust me, well, you probably have. Maybe you didn't know it. It's tough to spot them, and there's a lot of them, more than we think. And they're not necessarily malicious in any way, but they lack empathy, and that can be destructive. In any case, he had these instincts, and I thought, well, maybe I don't want to train this out of him. So we ended up moving a lot because of him to a more rural area. And then because we were in a more rural area, like, there was another dog where I live now, big dogs, and they bark when someone approaches the house, but then they stop barking. In the city, we're like, never bark. It's annoying when you bark. In the country, it's like, it's a good thing when the dogs bark, a little bit. And it's a good instinct. So also is cautious. Like, now when we go for walks in the country, we don't meet very many dogs. And when we do need to assess whether or not they're harmful. And so I decided that his instincts, which I thought were bad, are actually good. And they were very annoying to me in living in a city, which is a very unnatural environment. And the same is maybe true of humans. Like, what are human instincts? So it got me thinking about that. What are human instincts? And human instincts are, I might not get them all, but things like lust and I think anger in certain circumstances, and fear, a lot of fear, and curiosity, and maybe caution, and things like this. Tribalism, protecting those who are in your family, and acting aggressively towards people outside of your family, and those kind of things. And we're sort of saying that these are really bad instincts. But they're not necessarily bad, they're just bad in certain contexts. They may be inappropriate, we'll say, in certain contexts. Just like barking all day in the city for a dog is not appropriate. But it's also probably not appropriate to have a dog locked in an apartment where he's looking out the window at passerbys all day long. So we have to look at it that way. But anyway, Sam Harris assumes that tribalism is bad, or at least that's what he says during the podcast. But I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It's probably a good thing to have protective feelings towards your family, and to have those instincts is good because it does help our survival, and it does keep us safe, like that caution that my dog had, and all these things. And I would say that it's really good to be aware of these instincts, because if you are not aware of them, it's probably unlikely that you don't have instincts. It's probably more likely that you have them and they're not coming out in appropriate ways. So, like, the social justice warriors believe that they're beyond tribalism or something like that. It doesn't make sense to me to say that we've like evolved past our instincts, because it's just not the case. Like, we have our reptilian brain, and then we stick the cortex on top of it. It's more complicated than that, but it's an evolving thing where it builds on top of itself, and we haven't outgrown it in the fact that it's not there. We just have the ability to recognize it and make choices about it. So in any case, I just wanted to give my thoughts on the concept of truth and what that means, which I think is, that the highest truth is sort of the potential for all of life. And I don't think that we're capable of objectivity, first of all, because I don't think we're outside, like we talked about those instincts. I don't think we're outside of nature. I don't think we're beyond our instincts, or that we've outgrown them in any way. They're just coming out in different forms, and whether or not they're beneficial is probably not something I'll get into in this podcast, but another one. There was this comment about the idea that even quantum mechanics is within the realm of material reductionism. That was on YouTube that I got. And I think, well, it's in the realm of science, but I don't know that it can be in the realm of material reductionist, because ultimately, well, maybe I'm getting this exactly wrong, but my concept of it is that things are not necessarily fixed without an observer. And so to say that there's a fixed reality out there and we just need to map it out, and that theoretically we could map out everything and know everything in theory, even though we probably won't ever get there, I don't think that's the case, because things are not necessarily fixed when they're outside of our perception. We don't know what things do when they're outside of our perception, and I would say that there maybe is a truth out there. There appears to be some evidence of that in terms of like power of prayer and things like that. And I won't get into that now, but my point is that I think there is a truth out there that is objective, but it's not what we think of. Like, I don't think it's evidence. I don't think it's provable. And I don't think that it's mappable necessarily in the same way that like the structure of an atom is mappable. Anyway, okay, I'll stop talking now. That's been about an hour, and I hope that you enjoyed listening to me, and if not, that's fine too. Just stop listening. And if you enjoyed listening, I will try and do this more, and keep you, maybe put you to sleep, or whatever you listen to your podcast when you're doing. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.